Now, when it comes to stats page, the first thing we want to do is in the all jobs to set up show stats function. It's going to be a sync function. So again, we'll use create a sync thunk, and we're going to send a fetch request to the server. Now the endpoint is going to be jobs at stats. So the root URL, then job stats. It's going to be a get request. It's going to be authenticated. So we'll have to provide the token. And remember, at least in my case, it's already set up in the interceptor. And then as far as the return, we're going to get an object, and inside of it, there's going to be a default stats property, which is going to be object itself. And in there, we'll have three values. So we'll have the amount of jobs that are pending, interview, as well as decline. And if we just logged in, basically, if we haven't created any job, then we'll still get back these values. However, the values here are going to be 0. So pending 0, interview 0, and decline 0. And also we'll get the monthly applications. And effectively in here, it's going to be an array. And we'll get the last 6 months of applications. We'll have a date, which is going to be represented by the month and year, and the count. So how many applications we have sent out that month. And like I said, we'll display the last 6 months. So the last application in test user was in December. So now, of course, we go back to the July and we display these months. And one value, as you can see, is going to be used in a chart here in the x-axis. And then, of course, we'll provide the value of how many applications we have sent out in that particular month. So these are the two things that we're going to be getting back from the server. And we'll use those values to structure the stats page. As far as the logic, we need to come up with a function, create a sync thunk. We're not going to pass anything in. So we're just going to go with underscore, and we'll look for thunk API. Since, of course, we want to go with rejected value, we want to go with custom fetch. Again, the URL is jobs and stats. And for now, let's just log this data. Let's go with the response data. And then also let's return a response data. And then in the extra reducers, we'll do some logic. I'll say state is loading is true while we're pending. And if everything is correct, we want to set is loading to false. And then in the payload, we'll have that default stats property as well as the monthly applications. And we want to set them equal to state stats and state monthly applications. If you remember initially when we were setting this up, so all job slice, these are the two values we have in the state. So notice we have this stats, which will set it equal to default stats. So by default, it's just going to be an empty object. And then also we have monthly applications, which is an empty array. And then of course, if we're successful, then we'll change these values. Now I can tell you right away that we won't invoke this function right from the get-go. We first need to structure the stats page. So for now, we'll set everything up. And then in the next video, once we have some basic return in the stats page, we'll actually use effect and dispatch it. Or maybe I might quickly set this one up by the end of the video. Let's see how long it takes. So I guess let's just go to all stats and let's set up that request. So let me navigate there. So all jobs slice. We have get all jobs. And this is going to be our last request as a side note. There's not going to be more requests. However, we will add some logic here where we have the URL. So let's start with export const show stats is equal to create a sync thunk. Let's pass in the name. I'll say all jobs, then / show stats. Then comma, let's pass in the function. And here, we're not going to pass in any parameters, so underscore, and then thunk API. As far as the function logic, we'll set up a try and catch. We'll go with our response, so const response is equal to await, then auth fetch, or I'm sorry, custom fetch, and then we'll go with get. And in here, let's go with jobs and stats. So that's the URL. Now we don't need to pass in anymore a header. We're good to go. Now we just want to quickly log the response and then data. Now that's exactly what we'll return. So response data. And then as far as the catch, let's just go with return. And then thunk API. And I believe it was reject with value, correct? So reject with value, and then let's go with error, response, data, and message. So error, response, data, and message. Now, we could technically set up extra reducers right away. But you know what? Why don't we go to the stats page and just invoke this function? So here's what I want to do. Let's go to the pages, then dashboard, then stats. We want to set up the use effect, and also we want to get the dispatch. So let's try to set everything up using the auto import. So first I'm going to go with use effect, and eventually we'll set up a proper dependency array. For now, I'm just going to set up the empty array, which means that we'll invoke this once this page loads. And in here, we're going to go with dispatch, and doesn't, or I'm sorry, yeah, let me get use dispatch, and let me set it up over here equal to dispatch, const dispatch is equal to use dispatch. Let's invoke that. And then inside of the use effect, we're going to go with dispatch. And now we want to go with that show and then stats. And hopefully this is the correct one. Yep, we have all jobs slice. Let's invoke this. And now we should see that console log. This one over here, response data. I just want to showcase what we're getting back, and then we'll continue working. So in here it says all jobs slice, blah, 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 expected assignment. Let me see line 44. So response data. And yeah, of course, I need to return that. So return and then data. Let's invoke this. Yep, we have the stats. And if we take a look at the console, we'll see the object. That's what we're getting back. And then, like I said, we have default stats as well as the monthly applications. Just so you don't think that there's any funny business going on, I want to one more time showcase that, of course, it's going to work regardless of how many jobs you have. It's just going to be hard to see the charts as well as the filter functionality. But let me make this very clear. So I'm going to log back in with whatever user I had before. So I believe I was using this one. Then let me grab all of them. And even if I delete quickly all of them, you'll first notice that I have 8 pending, interview, and decline. And as far as the monthly applications, I have 9, and I created them in April of 2022. So it's just easier if you have a bunch of dummy data. The charts are going to look better. But just to showcase that we'll always get back something, let me quickly just remove all of them one by one. Looks like I have more than I thought, but oh well. So let's remove all the jobs. Then let's invoke. And you'll notice that we're still getting something back. So in here, once I navigate to the stats, and once I refresh, check it out. So I'll still get that default stats. So this is not going to change. But monthly applications, of course, is going to be 0. So hopefully it is clear why we're using that test user. Because that way we'll just have a bunch of dummy data. So now let me log out. And then log back in with my dummy user. And now let's continue. So we know what we're getting back. Now we just need to go in the extra reducers and set up the logic. So let me scroll down past the get all jobs. And I think I'll just copy and paste. And I'll change around the names, of course. So in here, I'm going to be looking for show, and then stats. Now, as far as pending, yep, that stays the same. As far as the fulfilled, we want to set stats equal to payload and then default stats. So payload and then default stats. And when it comes to monthly applications, we want to do exactly the same thing. So let me copy and paste and then And here we're looking for monthly applications. And we'll use the same value in the payload. So let's set this one up. And as far as the error, we'll leave it the way it is. So is loading and then toast error and payload. And with this in place, now we can start setting up the proper structure in the stats page. Beautiful. And as far as the stats page, it's going to consist of two components. So on top, we'll have here the stats container where we'll display the stats. And then in the charts container, we'll set up our charts. And we want to start by creating those components. So stats container, charts container, import, export. And then in the stats page, we want to get all of them, including the loading, as well as use dispatch use selector. And we already have the show stats as well as the use effect. So we don't need to worry about those ones. Then we'll grab is loading from all jobs as well as monthly applications. So the stats will grab separately in the stats container. So we don't need to worry about them. Now, technically, if you want, you can pull them out and then pass it in to the stats container, but I'm not going to do that. And in here, I'm going to go with dispatch and use dispatch. We already have dispatch and show stats, so that is out of the way. And then I just want to set up is loading. So if we're loading, then I'll return loading and I want to place it in the center. And then I want to render both of these components. The stats container, which for now is just going to have some dummy content, and also a charts container. However, when it comes to charts container, I only want to display it if I have some charts. Because while I was testing, it looked kind of stupid if you have no charts in here. Basically, if it's just an empty chart. And that's why I have here this condition. So only if there are some jobs, then of course we'll display the charts container. And this again brings me back to my original point where the functionality is going to work if you have even 0 jobs. It's just going to make way more sense if you can see everything in action. And that's why I suggest using that test user. And I promise this is the last time I'll mention this. So let's, I guess, start by creating those components. So back in the components, we're going to go with stats container. Let's go with a new component. I'm going to set it up as heading 2. Those divs are extremely small. And also we want to do the same thing with a charts container. Charts container, JS. Let's set up the component. Again, heading 2. So the same drill. And then let's go to index and let's import both of them. So say here, stats container, comma, and then charts container. And once we have both of them in this file, of course, we want to set up the export. So let me pass this one in. And then in the stats page, where it is in a dashboard somewhere. So dashboard, and then for some reason I don't see it. I have because I closed it. So I have here stats, yep. And you know what? I think I'm just going to replace the imports just so I don't have to type this. So let me copy from the README, and then in the stats, let me just replace it. And let's start working on the return, where first we want to grab the loading. So let's start over there. So const is loading. And then also we want to grab those monthly applications. And that is equal to use selector. And then let's pass in the store. Let's select store all jobs. So we have is loading. We have monthly applications. We already have the logic for the dispatch. And now where we have the heading 1, we'll set up here a fragment since we need to have one element that we're returning. And then let's go with stats container, basically our heading 2. And then let's set up that logic where I'm going to go with monthly applications length. Since that is an array, I can check it. And if the length is bigger than 0, what do we want to do? Well, then we want to display the charts container. Otherwise, effectively, it's just going to be an empty space there. So let's close the charts container. Let's take a look. Yep, I I have both of them. Since I have some items, I have both components rendered on the screen. Awesome. And up next, let's work on the stats container. First, we want to create a stat item. So essentially, this is going to be that card. And then we want to import some stuff. We want to get some icons, since each card is going to have an icon. We also want to grab the styles, so we'll go with wrapper. We want to set up the use selector, because we'll pull out the stats from all jobs. So pass in the store. And in here, similarly to how we worked with links, I'll set up array. Now, in this case, there's going to be more properties though, because they are more complex. So with link, I only had icon, text, and where the link needs to navigate. In this case, we have more stuff. And as far as the properties, we go here with title. So this is going to be whatever we display in the card, and then count. So I'm going to go with stats and pending. So for pending applications, I'll check the property, and just in case there's no values in there, I'm going to go with or operator, and I'll set up 0. Now, as I showed you, by default, we will get at least zeros from the server. So this is just a precaution. If we don't have any values, at least let's display something. And this is the icon I'm going to use in the card, as well as color and background color, because you probably noticed that the colors are different. And in this case, we will set them up using styled component. So if you remember when we work with all jobs and when we set up the status, we actually used here the CSS class. So depending on a status, we add a different class. In this case, I'll show you how we can do that using the styled component. So we'll pass this one in. That is my array. And then the logic is going to be wrapper. So all the styles, and then let's iterate over default stats, grab the item, grab the index, and then for every item in this array, we want to return a stat item component, and then pass in all the properties. And then in the following video, of course, we'll set up a proper return in the stat item. And yes, this is the case where I will copy and paste the default stats as well, because I, again, don't really see the point of typing this from scratch. So let's start by creating the stat item. Then let's grab the imports and then the default stats, and then rest of the logic is going to follow. So components, stat item, JS. Okay, let's set up the return. We want to go here with, let's say, heading 2. Then let's save it. We don't need to set it up in the index. We'll only use it in this folder. So we're good to go. Now we just need to go back to the README. We want to take all of these imports and we want to navigate to the stats container. Let's set them up. Then let's grab the stats object from the store all jobs. So const stats is equal to use selector, and then let's pass in the store and store all jobs. After that, let's work on that array. So I'll take this default stats from the README, and I'm just going to copy and paste and set it up in the stats container. So right after the stats, let's set up the default stats. And like I said, as far as the properties, we have the title, so title of the card, then count, so how many items we have, whether that is for pending, interview, and all that. So the number is going to be over here, text is going to be here, then the icon is going to be on the right hand side, and of course the colors, well, you can clearly see the colors. So we have some background color for the icon as well as the main card color. And these are the values. So if you want to change the colors, go ahead, just pick whichever color you want to use and then add here in the color or background color property. And then let's set up a proper return with a wrapper. Then inside of the wrapper, let's iterate over the default stats. So let's just go here with default stats. That's our local array map. Let's grab the item. Let's say here, item index. Index we need because this is React, so we have a list. And of course, we need that key prop. And then also we want to go with the stat item, the one that we just created. Key is equal to an index. And then let's pass in dot, 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 and item. Let's close it. And we should see 3 stat item heading 2s on the screen. And if you have the same result, now we can proceed and set up proper stat item. As far as the stat item, we just want to grab the wrapper from the wrappers. We want to pull out all the properties one by one, properties that we have in the default stats array. This is the case where we want to pass in the color as color on the wrapper and background as background as well. And this is something that I'm going to cover by the end of the video, effectively how the logic works in the styled component. And then we have a header with 2 spans and 1 heading 5. As you can see in here, we want to display count icon as well as the title. So let's go to a stat item. First, let's grab that wrapper. So we want to go with import wrapper. Yep, right away gives me stat item, which is correct. Then we want to pull out those properties. So count, title, icon, color, and background color. So all 5 of them: count, title, icon, color, as well as the background color. And when it comes to return, let's set up our wrapper. We'll add the color and background color eventually. For now, let's just pass in the header. And inside of the header, we'll set up a span. We'll add a class name of icon. And we'll render the icon as well. Now, above that, we'll go with another span. And in this case, the class will be count, as well as the value will be count. And then right outside of the header, we want to go with heading 5. We want to set up the class name. We want to pass in the title. And let's take a look at the title value. Now, I'm purposely not adding the color and background color. I just want to showcase what we were going to get. So this is going to be the default look. And now we just want to add those unique colors for each stat item. And the way we'll do that, we'll go here with color. So that's a specific prop that the wrapper is looking for. And we'll pass in our color value. And the second one will be the background color. And of course, we'll use the same value. Now, before you ask, yes, technically, we can set this up using good old regular CSS. Essentially, similarly to that status one, we can pass some kind of class here. And then depending on that class, we can style it. I just thought that it's going to be a little bit more interesting if we use a different approach. So this is styled components approach. And the way it works, if you navigate to the wrappers in the assets, and if you look for the stat item, you'll notice this code where, for example, for the border bottom, I have 5 pixels solid. And in here, I actually have the interpolation. Again, we have the template string. And we pass in a function, and that function accesses all the props. So since we set up 2 props on this wrapper, I can invoke the function, pass in the props, and say, look, the color will be equal to props color, whatever it is. Keep in mind that for each stat item, of course, that value will be different. And then I do the same thing here with a count for the color. Then we'll do the same thing with an icon. Only in this case, it's a background color. So background property, again, we set up the interpolation and we grab the background prop. And the same goes for the icon color. And as a result, we see these 3 stat items with different colors and of course different values, because that's what we're getting back from the server. And with this in place, now we can start setting up the charts container. All right, and up next, let's work on the charts container. Now it's going to consist of 2 more components, the area chart and bar chart, which represent 2 different charts. So this will be the bar chart, and then this is the area chart. And the reason why we have 2 components, while I was building, I couldn't decide which chart to use. So I posted a question on Twitter. Of course, didn't get any meaningful responses. Basically ended up with more questions than the answers. So I just said, you know what, let's just build both of these charts, and then the user can decide which one makes the most sense. And therefore, in the charts container, we'll have two components, the area chart and bar chart. I guess we'll start by creating the structure for those. We'll import use state since there's going to be a local state value. Like I said, imports for bar chart, area chart, wrapper, so the styles, as well as the use selector because I want to grab those monthly applications. So this is where we want to get that array with those last 6 months of applications. So how many applications we have sent out in the last 6 months, and we'll grab that from store and all jobs. And in return, we're going to go with heading 4 as well as the button. And once we click on a button, we'll just toggle the state value. So we'll have bar chart, set bar chart. By default, it's going to be true. So we'll display bar chart by default. And then if it's false, then we display the area chart. So I'll set up the ternary operator in the button where the text is, as well as right after the button where we'll check the state value. If it's bar chart, then we render this component and we pass in the data, and the data is going to be exactly the same. And if it's false, then we display the area chart. So like I said, I guess let's start by creating these two. So in the wrappers, we're going to go with bar chart. Now they're not going to be import export, so we don't need to worry about that. They will be just used here in the, or I'm sorry, actually I created in wrappers. You see, that's what happens when you show some stuff. So we need to remove it, or at least I do. So we want to set this one up in components. Let me make this very clear. So wrappers closed, assets closed. We want to go to components. We want to set up the bar chart JS. Let's set up the return. Let's go with heading 2 first, I guess. And then we also want to do the same thing with the area chart. Area chart JS. Same deal. Some dummy return first. Heading 2. Sounds about right. And then let's go to README, I guess, first. Let's grab those imports. And let's set up the logic. So back in the, you see, that's why I need to remove everything. Start from scratch. I think it's going to be easier to navigate around. So looking for charts container. And in here, I want to set up the imports first. And then we'll set up the logic. So first, I guess let's set up the state value. So we're going to go with bar chart and set bar chart. And by default, I'll set it equal to true. So let me make this uppercase, use state, and let's set it equal to true. Then let's grab those monthly applications, and I'll give it an alias of data, just so it's easier to work with the actual value. So applications, and that will be equal to a data. And we'll go with use selector. Let's pass in the store, and then let's grab all jobs value. So store, and then all jobs. So once we have selected both of them, I guess it's time to work on the return. We'll wrap everything in the wrapper. So all the styles are in place. Then we'll set up a heading 4, and we're going to go here with monthly applications. And right after that, let's set up that button. Let's go with button. Then type will be button. On click is going to be equal to set bar chart and the opposite value. So on click, let's pass in the arrow function first, and then set bar chart. And we'll set it equal to the opposite value of the current bar chart value, wherever it is. So we have a little toggle button in place. And now let's go with the text bar chart. And in here, I'm going to go the opposite way, because keep in mind, if this is true, then in the button, I want to showcase what chart I'm going to display. So if the bar chart is true right now, which is the default case, then in the button, of course, I want to display that, hey, you want to see the area chart, then click on the button. So hopefully that makes sense. That's why we go with opposite. Otherwise, you'll have bar chart here, and then once you click, then it's going to have the value of area chart. Now, maybe you can make an argument that that is actually better. I don't know. In my case, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to say area chart. And then if it's false, then we'll set up the bar chart. That's as far as the text. Now let's set up the actual logic, where again, we'll check the bar chart. We'll say if it's true now, of course, I do want to display the bar chart. I want to set up the data prop because this is what we will access in the actual component. So we haven't set that one up yet. Don't worry, we will. So there will be a data prop. What I want to pass in, well, data. So the monthly applications. Let me close the bar chart. And now we want to set up the colon here. And we want to go with area chart data equals to data. And then close this one as well. And if I navigate to the browser, I will see the monthly applications. And then as I click, notice, of course, we're rendering different component. So now we just need to set up those charts. And as far as the charts, I went with this library, the recharts one, simply because the one that we used in the GitHub project doesn't even support React, I believe, 17. Now, while I was working in a project, of course, React 18 came out. And this is also a tiny issue where, for the moment, recharts, the library we're going to use to set up our charts, does not support React 18. Now, don't worry, there is a little quick and dirty workaround. So we will be able to use the charts. But I'm just letting you know that if you try to install recharts directly, it's not going to work. Now, of course, it depends when in the future you're watching this. Of course, eventually they will update that. Now, as far as the tiny, quick and dirty workaround, we can go back to React 17, like so. Then we can install the recharts one. And then we can go back to React 18. So that way we'll be able to install a library, we'll be able to use it. So all of that works. It's just for some reason the install doesn't work. So now I'm switching back to React 18 and I can go with npm start. And let's just go to the homepage. In here, I provided the link to it. And let me showcase what you're going to see over there. We have guide, API, examples, and the blog. And in order to understand which components I want to use, I simply went and looked at the charts and which components are used in there and what kind of props we can pass in. And also we can even test it out in the sandbox. So if you click on this link, then you navigate to the sandbox. Now, it's not the best docs. I can honestly say that. Most of the stuff I actually got from the code sandbox. In my opinion, is just bunch of components and then the props, and it gets kind of confusing very fast. Now, of course, I understand that when it comes to charts, it's obviously not as straightforward as some other library, but regardless, if you want to set up some custom functionality, just be prepared to spend some time on it. And once we have installed the library, once we're able to spin up our project and everything works, now let's set up our first chart. All right. And let's start by setting up the area chart. And essentially, I just import these components. And just to reiterate, if you go to the docs, you can take a look at the examples. For example, simple area chart. Then you'll have the entire example of which components you want to import. And then notice how they already have some kind of array. And like I said, you can test it out here in the sandbox as well. And also there's an option for the API. So on this page, you can learn more about the components. So let's say if you'll click on area, you'll see which properties you can pass in. Now, as far as the setup for both of them is going to be extremely similar. For the area chart, I grabbed these components, and then for the bar chart, it's going to be a little bit different. But as far as return, we want to go with responsive container. I'll set up the width. I'll set up some kind of height, and this is in pixels. And then we go with area chart. And this is where we pass in that entire data. Remember, that is our array. And this one we pass into area chart. We add a little bit of styling, so we'll set up the margin on top, 50 pixels. And then when it comes to the x-axis, we want to go with data key prop, and we want to look for date. Now, why we want to do that? Well, because if we take a look at the Redux DevTools, and it doesn't matter where you do that. In my case, I'm going to set it up here in the complete application, but you can take a look at it in the development one. You'll notice that when it comes to monthly applications, like I mentioned before, we have the structure. We have date and we have the count. So in the x-axis, we'll use date. So this is where we'll display those dates, whether that's November, December, and whatever year. And then when it comes to the area, we'll grab the count. So how many applications we have. So as a result, notice in here we display the dates, and in here we display how many applications we have sent out. And essentially the same is for the bar chart. Again, we have the array, we'll pass this one in, and then on the x-axis, we'll display the month, and then in here in the bar, we'll display how many items. So I guess let's start setting this up, where in the area chart, I want to quickly grab those components. I'm not going to type them from the scratch. There's really no need. And we do want to rename it. Otherwise, there's going to be a name collision. So let me select, I guess, all three of them. And let's call this component. So area chart and then component. Then we'll be looking for data prop. As far as the return, we'll start by setting up that responsive container. And it has a prop by the name of width. In my case, I'm going to set it equal to 100%. And also, I'm going to add some kind of height. So in this case, I'm going to go with 300. Then inside of it, let's go with that area chart. So that's the main parent for the entire chart. And this one is looking for that array. This is where we need to pass in. In our case, that is our data. Then we'll say margin, because I want to add a little bit of styling. So I'll say top and then 50. And then inside of the area chart, let's go with this one, with the grid one, and we'll go with stroke dash array. And that one will be equal to 3 and 3. And if you're wondering, what is this component doing? So we're controlling right now the grid items. Let me close here. Notice these ones over here. So as you change these values, the styles will change for those little lines in the grid. Then let's set up the x-axis component. So say x-axis. And like I said, very important prop, data key. So now we need to say, well, which one we're going to use. And in my case, I have two properties in that object. I have date and I have the count. And on x-axis, I want to use the date. Then let's close it. So this one is not a parent. It's just a standalone component. Then we want to set up y-axis. And for this one, I just want to set up the prop where I'll say allow decimals equal to false. So when I'm talking about y-axis, I don't want decimals in here. I simply want the whole number. So allow decimals. For some reason, it doesn't give me this suggestion. Let me set it equal to false. Let's close it. And then we also want to add the tooltip component. And then lastly, we have that area where we'll add some colors as well. So we're going to go here with area. Type will be equal to a monotone. Then data key, again, extremely important. We're going to go here with count. So that's the second value we have. As far as the stroke, now, of course, we're talking about this line. And I want to make this one dark blue. That's why I'm going to look for this value. So I'm going to go with hashtag 2CB, then 1 and BC. And you can find these values in the index CSS. Now, when it comes to fill, we're going to go with hashtag, then BEF, and 8FD. Let's close the area. And while we're at it, why don't we set up the bar chart and then we can take a look at both of them. So back in the README, let's keep on scrolling. These are the components that I want for the bar chart. And again, we want to rename it right from the get-go. So let's navigate here Let's copy and paste. And we're looking for the bar chart container or component, whatever name I used here. So component, we'll grab the same data, so the same array. And now we just want to set up a different return. We'll start with the same thing. We'll start with the responsive container. We'll go with, again, width, height, all that. So that stays the same. Width will be 100%. Then height will be equal to 300 pixels. Then inside of it, let's go with that bar chart. So that's the main component again. That is looking for the data. And then we want to go with same thing. We want to go with margin, and then top is equal to 50. Next, we want to set up that grid. Same deal. It's going to be with the stroke dash array. So let's go with grid, stroke dash array. And just so you can see the values, I'm going to go here with 10 and 10. And of course, at the end, you'll see what is the difference between 3 and 3 and 10 and 10. Then let's set up the x-axis. Same deal. I'm going to go with data key and we'll set it equal to date. So right after this one, we're going to go with y-axis, hello, decimals, and that one will be equal to false, of course, just like in the area. Then we want to go with tooltip, close it, and then bar component, data, and key. Now that one is equal to count in this case. Fill will be equal to hashtag 2CB1BC. And bar size is essentially the width of the bar. In my case, I'm going to go with bar size and 75 pixels. So 75 in here. Let's close the component. And now let's take a look at our result. So I'm going to navigate to my dev. And then let's see. Let's refresh. And I think I used the old colors. My apologies. So let me quickly double check with the README. I think I needed to use this one. So, yep. We want to go to a bar chart component and we want to grab this value. So let me navigate back here. So this is what I used in the MERN course, and of course I didn't change them. So let me go back to the area as well, and I'll grab the stroke and fill since I want to change both values. So back in the area chart, flip them around. And now we should see the colors that we used in this project. So notice these are the applications, how many applications we send out. And now we're using the bar chart, and then we switch, this is going to be the area chart. And since I want to showcase how it's going to look like, let's say if we have one application, let me quickly log out. Let me register one more time. I'm not going to use the demo in this case, of course. So let's go back to John12, Gmail, and then the password. Let's log in. I think I'm going to create that one application. And yes, we're not wiping out the values. That's why you saw everything here. So this is something that we'll have to do when we log out. At the moment, still some values are left there. That is still coming up. Let me go to the job. I'll say front end. And I guess dev. And then let's go with some company. And I'm just going to say random. Let's add this job. Then let's navigate to the stats, and this is how it's going to look like if we have only one job. Like I said, it's easier if we have more data. So now let me log out, register, and I'm just going to use my demo application. And with this in place, now we're ready to start working on the filter functionality in the all jobs as well as the pagination.